What's going on, people? Myke C-Town here with an episode of Metal Milestones, where I talk about really important metal albums on the date of their birth. Kind of want to bring this back. I haven't done one in a really long time. I missed the birthday of Darkthrone's Transylvanian Hunger the other day, which is a really big bummer for me because that's actually one of my all-time favorite black metal albums. So I didn't want to miss the chance to talk about this one. And Emperor is actually my #1 favorite black metal band. I know that's not cult enough for some of you guys, and I don't care. It's just the way it is. Now, this is not my favorite album of theirs, nor is it my all-time favorite black metal album. We'll talk about that in a few months. But this is definitely one of the most important black metal albums of all time. So this came out on February 21st, 1994. I can't really speak definitively to the exact marks that it had on the scene at the time because this was a little bit before I was actually listening to black metal. I think I started listening to that stuff around 1995. I'm not saying I was some diehard or anything, but that was just the year I discovered it. Anyway, this is the debut album from Emperor, and I want to start off by talking about the fact that these guys were teenagers when this came out. Give or take a year, Ihsahn was 18, Sameth was 19, Faust was 19, and Short was 19. That is insane to me that these guys had this type of vision at that age. Prior to this, they'd already dropped the Wrath of the Tyrants demo in '92 and the Split with Enslaved, or otherwise the self-titled EP in '93. So they were already making noise in the scene, but it was this album that really blew people away. You know, 1994 was a really interesting year. You know, you had De Mysteriis, Dom Satanas that came out that year. You had Gorgoroth's Pentagram. You had Samael's Ceremony of Opposites. You had Satyricon Shadow Throne. You had the first Dark Funeral album. All came out that year, but there was actually something really special about this album, which we'll get into. But I still remember when I first heard this. It was around late 1995, and I've said before that the first black metal CD that I really dove into was the Blackened comp that came out in 1995. That introduced me to a whole lot of black metal bands, and the first song on that comp is Emperor's I Am the Black Wizards, and that song floored me. I remember listening to it over and over and over again until I found their CD for In the Nightside Eclipse at Tower Records, and I bought it immediately, and I listened to it so much I wore it out. I knew damn near every note, every part, every passage on that album. And what was so fascinating about this album to me was it was so different from what I'd known to be evil or satanic music. I'd mostly heard death metal and Slayer at that point. You know, I had it in my head that all dark and evil music was supposed to be mean and aggressive. And while this album was aggressive, there was something about it that also made it entrancing and atmospheric and almost beautiful. The way it starts off with a really haunting intro and then bursts into the infinity of thoughts with those blast beats and those fast riffs and those throaty vocals. It was weird to me because even though it was hypnotizing and it sucked me in immediately because of the riffs, there was also this odd, melancholic, kind of sad sounding beauty about the music, which I think comes from the keyboards. You know, the keys are really what set it apart from everything else at the time. Sure, you had Gehenna, you had Dimmu Borgir, you even had Cradle of Filth's first album, Prince Believe Evil Made Flesh, that came out this year, and they all were heavy on the keyboards, but Emperor used them in a totally different way. The way they incorporated the keyboards didn't take away from the darkness of the album at all, or add any circusy feel to it. If anything, it enhanced it in a weird way. You know, everything still sounded scary, it was melodic while still being menacing. You know, Emperor was that perfect match of beauty and darkness to me at the time, and the first song epitomizes what black metal was to me in 1995. From the tremolo guitars to the pounding drums to Ihsahn's insane vocals, this album had an ambiance unlike any other at that time. And I remember scoring a VHS tape of Emperor playing live that I'm pretty sure was from around this time that the album was released. I got it trading with somebody overseas. And if you watch what Ihsahn and Sameth are doing on guitar, on that video. It was apparent to me that their proficiency with their instruments was a step above some of their contemporaries at the time. I don't know that black metal was taken very seriously in those days in terms of musicianship, and I even have friends now who think that black metal is nothing but tremolo picking and horribly played drums. Then I show them this record, and they almost always change their mind. You know, the songwriting capabilities here are absolutely incredible. It felt like every element here had a purpose. The re-recorded version of Cosmic Keys to My Creation in Times is just awesome. If you'd heard the self-titled EP as I had, then you'd already heard this song, but this version definitely sounds different. It's a bit tighter, and there are some slight guitar intricacies that weren't there before. It could also be that the production on this was a bit different than it was on the EP. While it still had that kind of vacuum cleaner sounding production, it was still a bit cleaner than that on the EP. The song after it, Beyond the Great Vast Forest, is one of my favorites on the album. I just really love that riff at the beginning of it. It's hard to call black metal catchy, but it's a riff that gets stuck in my head so easily when I hear it. And there's a part in the song which is about as close to a breakdown as black metal could have gotten at the time. And if you've heard the song, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But that part is just so goddamn good. And the thing that's most compelling about that part is what Ihsahn is doing on the keys there. It sounds so perfect and, again, terrifying. You know, this song is just so full of twists and turns that it's hard to walk away from it unimpressed. Again, that these guys were so young and doing something so original. And talking about breakdowns, the one in I Am the Black Wizards is still just so perfect. The version on this record is a bit atmospheric as opposed to the version on the EP, but I feel like this one fits the song better, you know, especially with the lyrics. How many wizards that serve me with evil I know not. My empire has no limits. From the never-ending mountains black to the bottomless lakes, I am the ruler and has been for eternities long. I am them. So any Emperor fan knows that, according to some, after this, they jumped the shark. They got more proggy with the less traditional black metal elements. Personally, I enjoyed their later albums, maybe not as much as this one, but I definitely like them. But I've also said to the people who are confused by their transition that if you really listen to what they were playing on this record, it's really no surprise that they went in a more technical proggy direction. The guitar work on this album is a bit more complex than on some of the other albums coming out at the time. The songwriting is really dense. And the closer, Eno a Satana, is a perfect example. Listen to the first riff and tell me you can't see them doing something like this on their later records. I feel like this was easily a sign of what was to come. Even though this record was a staple and is a staple for black metal, it's fairly easy to see how they moved away from what was known as traditional black metal at the time. But this album, to me, laid the groundwork for a lot of black metal albums after this. You know, they were really the ones who gave the blueprint on how to tastefully put keyboards into your black metal album and keep them still sounding dangerous. There are plenty of harmonies while still having a lot of gloominess there. And I find it hilarious when I hear about people shitting on albums like this these days, especially when I hear these dorks calling stuff like this mainstream black metal, because in later years albums like this became more popular with standard black metal fans as well as, you know, spectators or outsiders. And because this album is a bit more accessible than some of the super raw shit that came out later, this gets tossed into a bucket of mainstream, which is just stupid. I know it's hard for people to transport themselves back into this time, but before you make incredibly ignorant statements like this, I feel like you have to at least try to put yourself into these days. When this album came out, this was as far from mainstream as anything could possibly get outside of like straight up noise. You know, it was cold, it was terrifying, it was creepy, and for many people, it was the epitome of evil. You know, it was Satan on recording. And to denigrate this down to mainstream metal is just plain ignorant and or stupid. Take your pick. To me, this album is damn near perfect. It's one of the most well-played and well-written black metal albums of all time. One that definitely stands the test of time. You know, one that any black metal fan that I've spoken to that actually understands where black metal came from and respects the art itself holds in a very special place, and I am happy to be here celebrating its birthday. So if you've heard the album, let me know what you guys thought of it down there, and let me know what albums that you want me to talk about on their birthday that might be coming up. And yeah, that's it. As usual, thank you for living, thank you for loving, thank you for being you, and I'll see you guys next time. All right, peace out, boy.